Hello, we're going to learn how to make a fabric basket to store whatever you would like. It has two pieces of fabric, one for the inside and one for the out. And first you will be given or will have 4 pieces, 2 for the inside, 2 for the outside, and each of these pieces are 11 inches by 11 inches. Then you will be receiving 2 pieces of interfacing. One side is shiny and that has the glue so you can iron it onto the outside pieces of your basket fabric. So I have chosen this as my outside fabric. So I have ironed the interfacing on each piece. Now what we're going to do after you've ironed the interfacing, you're going to take each of the 4 pieces of fabric and the interfacing, and you're going to measure on each bottom corner using your gauge 2.5 inches square. So what you're going to do, you're going to mark 2.5 inches square on this side and on this side, and you can see I have done that. And then what you're going to do, you're going to cut that with your scissors. And I am cutting, and I do the 2 pieces together so you don't have to cut 4 pieces, you're cutting 2 at a time. So what I have now are 2 pieces of my inside fabric. This is different than what I showed you before. You'll have 2 pieces of inside fabric that have each corner cut out on the bottom. And then you're going to put right sides together and set it aside. And then you're also going to do the same thing with the outside fabric that has the insulation on the back. You're going to cut 2.5 inch squares on each bottom piece and put the right sides together. Our next step will be to sew this side, and this side. You will not sew here, or not on top. Just here, here, and here. And I'm going to sew that quickly and then show you what it looks like. Okay, you will see I have sewn the fabric. I hope you can tell where the thread is. I've sewn here, here, and along here. So this part is left open on each corner, as you will see. The next step, you will do the same also for the other side. You'll have 2 sets, 2 pieces that you'll be sewing, 4 in all, but after you sew them together, then you'll have the inside fabric and the outside. What you're going to do on these open pieces, you're going to fold the opposite way, match the seams, and fold the selvage on each side, both in the same direction. You're going to sew right along here. And on each of my seams, I use a 1/4 inch seam to 1/2 inch. Be consistent on the selvage size, so that way everything will match up together in the end. So what I'm going to do now I'm going to sew along here and show you what it looks like. I'm doing each corner the same way. I've sewn this corner. Now I'm going to sew this corner. And what I like to do, I like to make sure the selvage is folded the same direction on each side, if that makes sense to you. And I like to match up the seams so that way it won't look uneven. And I like to trim the threads so when you're finished it doesn't look messy. I trim all of the threads at the beginning and the end of each seam. So now I have what looks like the inside of the basket. On the outside of the basket, I've already sewn the corners so you could see what it looks like. So on the outside fabric, what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn it right side out. And you can see it looks like a basket. So now this is the inside fabric. What I'm going to do, you can tell it is still wrong side out and this is right side out. But what I'm going to do to make sure the right sides are together, now I'm going to place the lining or inside fabric over the outside of the outside basket. And you should see that they match up evenly because hopefully you've used the same seam allowance on each piece. So the next step is to match up these seams together and sometimes this top part doesn't match up exactly, and that's okay, but I try to get the inside basket to fit pretty evenly over the outside basket. And then what I'll do is match up the seams, make sure the seam allowances are folded in the same direction, like here and here, and at the bottom, so that way it will lay nicely. And then I pin all the way around. I start with where the seams are so I'll know they match up. And as you can see, my inside and my outside fabrics match or are the same size. There are no gaps. If you have a gap in the fabric where this is larger than this fabric or vice versa, what you can do is then take this seam and make it either smaller or larger to where this will fit exactly. So I'm going to continue pinning. And then what I'm going to do is sew around this edge, but I'm not going to sew all the way around. I'm going to leave about 3 inches without sewing so I can turn. So what I've done, I've put a pin to remind myself not to sew past here. I'm going to start here, sew all the way around to this pin, leaving this portion right here open for turning. Now I'm going to sew. And on your machine, since this is circular and this doesn't fit over your machine, some machines have portions that you can pull out to make your machine smaller, to get around smaller areas. And so that's what I had to do. And also, as you were taught in class, remember to reverse when you begin and end each seam, so that way the seam will not come unthread. And as you can see, my top did not match up, but that's okay. Just make sure the seam is straight as you go around. And after you sew it, you can trim this off just so it won't be so bulky in the end. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to trim the selvage off a little, just so when you fold it in the end, it won't be quite as bulky. So now we've sewn the top part of our basket, and I'm trimming the threads like I've instructed you to do. So now with this opening, we're able to turn the basket right side out. And you can leave it a little bit larger if you want to make it easier to turn. It takes a little bit of effort to get the fabric through that opening. And with the interfacing, it makes the outer fabric a little stiff, but it works. So now, as you can see, I've turned it right side out, and I'm placing the lining inside. So now what we have is a basket, but we have one more step. Well, actually two, because what we're going to do, you'll notice because of the selvage, this wants to stay up, but what you need to do is fold it where the seam is right on the edge. And what I like to do is iron this where it lays nicely before we sew our next seam and our last seam. So, and we have an opening here, so you'll want to press the seam allowance towards the inside where you want it to lay when we sew our last stitch. So turn this all the way in and then press it. And I'm going to take this basket and show you what it looks like. After it's pressed, it should lay nicely and the seam should be right on the edge. And then what we're going to do, I like to pin where the opening is so that way it won't shift when you're sewing. But you're going to sew, make a top stitch all the way around. And what this top stitch does, it makes it look finished, but it also closes up that opening that you used to turn. So you're going to sew all the way around, and then you're finished. And then turn down the top, and you have a fabric basket. Thank you.